Hi, this video is going to follow along with me as I take the very first piece that we cut out and I do the measurements on this piece and then begin the cutting out. This is the piece that's called the face piece, and if you received it in a kit or if you cut one out yourself, it's roughly, the rough piece is 25 centimeters by about 50 centimeters. But what we use is this pattern in order to draw on it. Now the very first thing about this is that the pattern itself has some markings on it that I want to correct to begin with and do in a little bit different way. And this is quite helpful as you get down the road. These numbers where it says 3B, 1B, 5B are things that you're going to mark onto the cloth. And on this particular pattern, they're in the wrong place. So where it says 3B here, it really should be up here. So you can see likewise this should be written up here. This should be written here. Now, I'm going to just turn it over. And the same thing would be for this and for 2B. That just turns out to be helpful in the long run. And the more we can avoid confusion as we go along, the better. Now you'll see along this pattern has numbers along the baseline and along this line. If we were doing graphs, this would be the X and this would be the Y. They also have numbers up here. I'm going to be using the numbers along the X and along the Y. And the very first thing to do with your cloth, before we look back at this, is to iron your cloth, which I've done and I didn't do for the video. You know how to iron a thing so that it's nice and flat, and that we're going to get, you know, when we mark on it, that it's easy and doesn't stretch around. And the piece of cloth that we start with may not necessarily be square. So I have this quite large square, and I'm going to start off making sure that I can get a nice square there. And just to establish my baseline, I'm going to mark it, okay? One of the nice things about this square also, sorry if my hands and the shadows are in the way, but you get the idea, is that you can hold the cloth flat while you draw your baselines. Well, while you draw any of the lines. You can see now that the pencil I'm using is a ceramic pencil, a Soline ceramic pencil for drawing on cloth. It tends to work quite well for this black. So that's my y-axis there. And then I'm going to bring along the bottom down here. It got a little bit bunchy because I wasn't holding the square tight. There we go. Let's just take a look at it. It's fine. An X and Y axis that are at right angles to each other, okay? Okay, so the next thing we do is we start to do some measuring. And we do that off of our chart. So here's my millimeter ruler. I have a 60 centimeter one, which tends to work here. You could have a 100 centimeter one, that's fine. Okay, we start with this chart, and what I do is, starting from the very side, now the marks don't have to go right on the line, but it's nice if they're parallel to the line. So I'm going to look at my line and expose my baseline, or my x-axis here. And I'm going to go along, these are cumulative. So when it starts at 0, that's 0. Then it says 1. I'm going to make a mark at 1. And then it says 3.5. I'm going to make a mark at 3.5. And then it's 7. Make a mark at 7. 9.5. 9.5. Right there. 10.5. Okay. 10.5. 11.5. 14. There we go at 14. 17.5. We go along the baseline and put all those numbers in, which I will do now. Now I've drawn all the numbers in, or on the bottom, and it never hurts to double check and triple check. You know the old carpenter's adage, measure twice, cut once. So you can actually go backwards and you can look down here along your line and say to yourself, okay, I see this is at 1. Oh, that's what it says there. What is this? This is 3.5. Oh, that's what it says there. 7. Oh, that's what it says there. 9.5 is what I read here. 9.5 and so on. As a way to double check. So now that we've done that on the x-axis, we're going to use these cumulative numbers over here, where it says here, and we're going to go along the y-axis. And we'll put our ruler in here, making sure it starts at 0. Again, I may have to cover this up and you won't see it on the video, but okay, that's 0, and then there's 1. Okay, now when I have a hard time seeing things, I use this, as I've shown you before. That's my little magnifying cheap thing, where I can really see where I'm marking. So I may even have to stick my head in the way here now. So there's 10.5. Boy, I can sure see it better with this than I could without this. 13. Oh, 13. 14. Okay, 14. 15. Okay, and so on. So now I finished going along the y-axis, finishing up at 23 there. Looks like I have a lot left over. And now that we've established that, we want to continue to make sure that this is square. And we want to put those same measurements in on the other axes. So the way I do that is I come along my baseline here, and I come out here where I've double checked and triple checked that I'm ending up at the right value. And I draw, hold this down firmly, and I draw that line. Okay? And now I can do the same thing here. I'm going square against this. Actually, rather than going square against that, I'm going to measure up. And I know that that's a total of 23. So over here, I'm going to measure up a total of 23. Put a little line. Every time you want to, you can always check. Just keep checking. That's 23 there, that's 23 there, okay? Now we'll draw a line across the top. Nice long piece of cloth here, so I'm going to hold it down with my elbow in addition to my hand. This ceramic one gives a nice fine line, whereas the pencils that I've been using, the colored pencils, don't tend to give us quite a fine a line. Okay, now we repeat the same exercise where I'm going to measure across the top. Oh, that's good. That's 47.5. That's total from there to there. So across the top here now, I'm going to measure 1, 3.5, 7, and so on across the top. And as you have guessed, I'm going to go on the end here and now measure up. That's a total of 23. That's good. And here are my numbers. And again, I'm going to use these numbers that go up. So from 0, first one's at 1, 10.5, and so on. Now the next step is to join these lines. That's where this good big square comes in handy. Now I've also double checked the measurements, and you can look as you work with it to make sure that everything looks square. Okay? Now, one thing I'm going to do here, well, I'll do it in a minute here. So I'm drawing the horizontal lines first here. Okay. There we go. Now I have a mark in here that I can see that this line didn't get drawn there very well with the pencil. I'll go back over it. That's better. Cloth bunches up a little bit. Maybe I can lean on this with my elbow. Nice and firm. Okay. Get my lid, get out. Okay, and continue with that. Now we're at a point where I'm drawing what on the chart is a dashed line. That line right there. It's a dashed line on this sewing pattern. Now that dashed line means that we're going to end up cutting there. Now not everybody does this, but since I know that's a cut line, what I've been liking to do is to put little hash marks on it, like this. Which reminds me that that is where I cut and nowhere else. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do at this point is just remind us that this is the outside border, so that would be cut too. And likewise with the other two borders. Here, this is going to end up being cut. This one will be cut. As I said, not everybody does this, but I just want to be cautious. And when you get to cutting, it sometimes helps if you're thinking about something else or just get a little bit confused because there's a lot of lines. Okay, so I have to be careful there because I'm going to use those for measurements. So you continue drawing your straight lines across, and wherever it's dashed on the sewing pattern, you can mark it that is where you're going to cut with your scissors. Okay? And this one is not. Those will end up being sewing lines. And you continue the same thing with the vertical lines. You find your marks that you've put on there. And you draw your lines. Now this is where I probably could have waited to draw those hash marks on the outside cut because it could be confusing here where your marks are. So you have to be very careful. Make sure you've got going to a mark and not one of those hash marks. Okay? And here we come to this group. It's a pattern, of course. This group that are about 1 centimeter apart. It's the center one. It's the cut line. That's the one that's going to go right there. And I'll put hashes on it after I draw this. Okay, so here's my cut line. I'm going to end up cutting that with a pair of scissors right there. As usual, double checking is good. I've drawn all my lines. Vicky and Hunter, actually, once they measured theirs, they put it aside for a day and came back the next day and measured it the next day before cutting it. Biggest clue is it needs to be 47 and a half long and 23 high. And then all of these need to look rectangular with nice square or rectangular, good corners, 90-degree corners, you know. So if there's any lines that aren't like that. And then I'm checking for my cut lines. It's one down the middle. There's only one cut line within the body. It goes horizontally. And then there's there's four. 1, 2, 3, 4 of those cut lines that go there. So I'm going to end up cutting that, not counting the very outer edge, which I will also cut. Now, very important before we move this or even think about cutting is that we put these numbers in. So an easy way to do it, and one of the things that's a cue off of the pattern here, is to look at these numbers that we can read when it's, you know, this side up. Okay, so here's this first cut line. Here's this space, and then here's this. So this right here is 3A, okay? Jump over to this cut line. We have a number of spaces. There's another cut line. And then right next to this is 1A. And then this final panel here is 5A. Now we come down here, and the 3's are going to be on top of each other. So if you have that one in the right place, this one should be, and it comes into this space here that we corrected. This is 3B. This is facing this way, so I'm just going to go over here now and go to 1B. 1B. And once we cut these apart, the A's and B's are going to go together, and we're going to sew A to B. So we have a whole piece of cloth, we're going to cut it up and sew it back together. Okay, one more here on this side, and that's 5B. Okay. Now, one easy way I've found to do this is just to take both your cloth and the pattern and turn them upside down. Okay? So now the pattern got flipped. The cloth got flipped. Pattern got turned over. Oh, and now we have numbers that we read on this side. Okay. So we come one cut line, two cut lines, here, here. So that's 4A. So I'm going to just do this a little different than I did. So I would know that this is 4B down here in that box, like that. Okay? And then there's 2A, which is not in the farthest one over, but one over, that's 2A. And there's 2B. Okay. Now, it seems like we're doing well here. Just make sure we have all the numbers. Okay. Looking on this side, there's 4A, and that pattern looks a lot like where it is. There's 2A, and then of course 4B, 2B down here. Looking at it upside down, there's 3A. B looks good. 1A, 1B, it's right next to that. And way over here, 5A, 5B. Okay. Now we've got it laid out, measured, marked. The next step is to cut it. So there you have it, ready to cut. There was some question about whether you use pinking shears to cut these pieces of cloth, and I bought a pair of scissors at the sewing store that cost $4. I think they sell fancy scissors, but there you have it, huh? Okay, well, seems to me cutting the outside edge would be a good place to start. So there's that outside edge. And this one doesn't have to be, well, all of these get kind of sewn under, so they don't have to be super precise. But the best you can do is good. Okay, here's this one. Double checking, there's lots of lines here, so double checking that it has the little hash marks on it. I see that they do. There we go. Continue cutting. Now, because we're grouping these in the numbers together, I'm going to cut this way before I cut down the long ways. And I'll show you another thing that saves time in the long run. So there we have that. That was the right line. Okay, here's another line. That. That's the line with the marks on it. Thinking about when you get to the cutting, you want to get through it, but I guess if you're a carpenter, you're used to that, but getting through it is not the main point. The main point is getting it right. So looking, that it falls between these, that's the pattern. It's got these little spaces here, and then also I've got those lines drawn on there, which help me. Okay, the only reason I've held you captive for this cutting is I wanted to show you what I found easy, and the reason I cut those first is I've got my pins here ready to go with me. Now as I cut this between 5A and 5B, before I go any farther at all, I pin those together because I'm going to want to use them together. It just saves time, so you don't have assortment and you have to keep sorting them out over and over. So then you continue. That's the line right down the middle there. Okay, until you've cut and pinned all 5. And then you're ready to do the next step of taking these 2 and pinning them together. Okay.